The clinking of heavy crystal glasses, the soft scraping of silver forks against fine china, and the low, pretentious hum of expensive restaurant jazz. It all died at the exact same second. It died the moment I leaned forward and asked my question. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't stand up, flip my chair, or slam my fist down on the heavy oak table. I simply looked down at the empty, blindingly white space on the tablecloth directly in front of me, then shifted my gaze to the nervous young server. And finally, I looked directly at my mother. The server, a kid who looked barely out of college, was wearing a sharp black vest and practically sweating through his stiff white collar. He held his digital tablet pressed so tight against his chest it looked like a bulletproof shield. He'd just spent the last 5 minutes circling our massive, extravagant private dining table, carefully placing beautifully plated roasted chicken, seared salmon, and truffle risotto in front of my cousin, my aunt, my sister, her shiny new fiancé, and my parents. But when he finally reached my chair, the very last chair tucked away at the edge of the room, he just walked right past me. It wasn't an accident. You could tell by the way his shoulders hitched. I leaned in, keeping my tone perfectly measured, and quietly asked the kid if there had been some sort of miscommunication with the final head count for the evening. Before the poor guy could even stutter out a rehearsed apology or check his tablet, my mother Brenda leaned around a massive, absurdly expensive centerpiece of white hydrangeas. She didn't look embarrassed. She didn't look apologetic. In fact, she looked triumphant. She stabbed a piece of bitter arugula with her fork, looked me dead in the eyes across the flickering candlelight, and delivered her punchline. "The help does not eat with us, Nadia," she said, her voice dripping with absolute condescension. "I only ordered for family." The entire table went completely, suffocatingly silent. You could clearly hear the air conditioning vent humming steadily above us. My younger sister Cassidy suddenly found her white linen napkin to be the most fascinating object in the universe, adjusting it over her lap as if she were performing complex surgery. Her fiancé Julian just hid a nasty, satisfied smirk behind the rim of his red wine glass. They were all just waiting for me to break, waiting for me to cause a massive scene so they could point their fingers and call me the crazy, jealous, bitter older sister. My name is Nadia. I am 32 years old. In the grand narrative of this family, I am the oldest child, but I am not treated like a daughter. I am the emergency contact on every medical form. I am the person who shows up with a heavy toolbox when the water heater bursts, the person who fixes the internet router when it dies, and the person who pays the electric bill when the final disconnection notice arrives stamped in bright red ink. To them, I am not a person, I am a utility. I am the human equivalent of a fire extinguisher sitting quietly behind a pane of dirty glass. They ignore my entire existence until their kitchen is literally burning down, and then they expect me to put out the flames for absolutely free. I sat there in my cheap navy blue blazer. It was a wrinkled thing I had specifically bought from a local thrift store for $9 just to wear to these mandatory family gatherings. I looked around the room, taking in the elegant long runway of a table, illuminated by those trendy warm Edison bulbs that cost a fortune to rent. I looked back at my mother, who was now casually chewing her salad like she had just won a gold medal. She genuinely believed she had just put me securely in my place. She looked at me and saw nothing but a broke, socially awkward tech girl who spent her life fixing dirty machines and server racks for minimum wage. She had absolutely no idea that the woman sitting across from her with no dinner plate was the sole founder and chief executive officer of a massive corporate tech infrastructure company. She had no idea that I currently had $50 million tied up in assets to my legal name. And she definitely did not know that I alone held the absolute ironclad legal rights to the $50 Zuzo venue deposit that was currently keeping this entire extravagant wedding weekend from collapsing into absolute. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the smell of roasted garlic fill my lungs. The game they were playing was finally over. To truly understand why a mother would go out of her way to publicly humiliate her oldest daughter in front of 20 people at a fancy restaurant, you have to rewind the clock back exactly 5 years. This entire toxic dynamic did not just suddenly start with a missing dinner plate on a Friday night. It started with a crippling tuition bill, a sudden thunderstorm, and a brand new luxury car sitting in a suburban driveway. 5 years ago, I was 27 years old and running completely on empty. I was working 3 entirely separate, exhausting jobs just to keep a roof over my head. During the day, I fixed broken laptops and shattered phone screens on my cramped kitchen table. On the weekends, I crawled through the dusty drop ceilings of cheap office buildings, running network cables until my hands bled. And at night, I worked the graveyard shift doing low-level tech support for a terrible regional bank. I was sleeping maybe 4 fragmented hours a night. I survived on cheap instant ramen noodles, black coffee, and clearance rack clothes that never quite fit right. I was bone-tired, but I was burning with ambition. After months of grueling preparation, I had finally been accepted into a highly competitive specialized master's degree program focusing on advanced data recovery and server architecture. It was my one real ticket out of the dirt. But there was a massive problem. I had saved every single penny I could, skipping meals and walking miles in the snow to avoid bus fares. But I was still exactly $0 short for the first semester's tuition. I had never asked my parents for a single dollar. Not once since the day I turned 18. While my younger sister Cassidy got her expensive cell phone bills paid, her downtown apartment rent fully covered, and her maxed-out credit cards magically cleared by our parents every single month, I quietly paid my own way. But this time I was truly desperate. The final payment deadline was in less than 24 hours, and if I missed it, my spot in the program would be given to someone else. I took the public bus right out to their massive house in the nice suburbs. The sky was dark, and a heavy, cold rain had just started to fall. I remember standing in their wide, perfectly paved driveway, tightly clutching a plastic folder that held my printed university acceptance letter and a highly detailed spreadsheet. The spreadsheet showed exactly how I would pay them back the $2,000, complete with a structured 12-month timeline and a fair interest rate. I walked through the front door and stepped into the living room. My father, Gregory, was sitting deep in his expensive leather recliner, nursing a beer and watching a golf tournament on a massive flat-screen television. My mother was sitting on the sofa, flipping through a glossy luxury home catalog. I stood right there in the middle of the expensive rug, my damp shoes squeaking slightly, my hands shaking with nerves, and I made my pitch, showed them the careful math. I explained the incredible opportunity this master's program represented for my future. I told them I wouldn't be asking for anything ever again. My mother didn't even look up from her catalog. She just sighed dramatically and said, "Nadia, darling, you know how tight things are right now. Your father just bought Cassidy that new luxury sedan she wanted, and the down payment alone was astronomical. We simply don't have an extra $2 lying around for your little hobby." My father, without taking his eyes off the golf game, grunted, "You're a grown woman, Nadia. Figure it out."
We've done enough for you.
I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. The new luxury car. That was the first I'd heard of it. Cassidy, who had never worked a day in her life, got a brand new car, while I, who worked myself to the bone, was denied a loan for my education. I left their house that night, the rain washing away any lingering hope I had. I missed the deadline. My spot in the program was gone. But that wasn't the end. That rejection fueled a fire in me. I doubled down on my work, saving every penny, learning everything I could about tech infrastructure. I started my own company, Apex Infrastructure, out of my cramped apartment, building it from the ground up with sheer grit and sleepless nights. 5 years later, Apex Infrastructure was a multi-million-dollar success, and I was its CEO. My parents and sister, of course, had no idea. They still saw me as the broke tech girl who fixed their Wi-Fi for free. Fast forward to the present. My sister Cassidy was getting married to Julian, a man from a wealthy family who frankly was a smug, entitled snob. The wedding was planned to be an opulent affair, a true display of their supposed high status. My parents, always eager to impress Julian's family, were pulling out all the stops, and, as always, they expected me to contribute financially, even if they wouldn't acknowledge my presence. The first hint of their true intentions came when my mother called me. Not to invite me to the wedding planning, but to inform me that I was expected to chip in for the venue deposit. "It's a family affair, Nadia," she'd said, her voice sugary sweet. "And you know how expensive these things are. We thought you could cover the $50,000 deposit. It's just a temporary hold, of course. You'll get it back." I knew exactly what this was. They wanted my money, but they didn't want me. I agreed, but with a crucial stipulation. The deposit would be paid directly from my corporate account, Apex Infrastructure, and the legal rights to that deposit would remain solely with me. My mother, too caught up in securing the funds, barely registered the details. She just saw the $50,000 coming in. The rehearsal dinner was supposed to be a private affair for the immediate family and close friends. I only found out about the exact time and location because my Aunt Martha accidentally mentioned it to me on a brief phone call. I checked my personal email. There was a highly generic automated reminder sent directly from the venue software, but absolutely no direct personal invitation from my sisters or my mother. They were intentionally trying to freeze me out. They wanted me to feel deeply isolated, desperately hoping the immense social pressure would finally break my stubborn resolve, and I would open my wallet just to buy my way back into their good graces. I decided right then and there to show up to the rehearsal dinner anyway. I went into my closet and pulled out the exact same cheap, wrinkled navy blazer. I drove my rattling 10-year-old car straight to the expensive downtown restaurant district. I was fully prepared to sit quietly in the back corner, eat my free dinner, and go home to my quiet life. I had absolutely no idea they had meticulously prepared a massive public execution just for me. I parked my rattling sedan 3 blocks away from the restaurant because I absolutely refused to pay $20 for valet parking. The evening air was sticky and warm, and as I walked toward the downtown district, I mentally prepared myself for the usual exhausting family dynamics. The restaurant Cassidy's and Julian had chosen was one of those aggressively trendy, overpriced places that tried incredibly hard to look like an abandoned warehouse. The exterior was all exposed red brick, heavy black iron accents, and tinted glass. The moment I pulled open the heavy front door, I was hit by a wall of air conditioning and the overwhelming heavy scent of roasted garlic and truffle oil. I gave the hostess my name, and she silently led me through the crowded main dining room, navigating through tables of people wearing expensive suits and cocktail dresses. I suddenly felt highly conscious of my faded navy blue blazer and my practical scuffed black flatoons, but I pushed the feeling down. I was here to eat my free meal, fulfill my basic familial obligation, and leave as early as politely possible. The hostess pushed open a set of heavy wooden double doors, leading me into a stunning private dining scene in the back. The room was beautiful. There was no denying that. A massive long rectangular table was set squarely in the middle of the room, draped in blindingly white linen. Tall glass vases overflowing with imported white hydrangeas acted as centerpieces, flanked by dozens of flickering, expensive scented candles. Above the table hung thick black iron wires ending in trendy warm Edison bulbs that cast a golden glow over everything. The entire family was already there. My parents, Cassidy, Julian, his wealthy parents, and a carefully selected handful of aunts, uncles, and cousins were all standing around the edges of the room, holding crystal glasses of champagne and laughing a little too loudly. When I walked through the doors, the laughter did not completely stop, but the overall tone in the room immediately shifted. It was like a sudden drop in barometric pressure. My Aunt Martha, who was standing near the bar, caught my eye. She gave me a very tight, incredibly uncomfortable smile, gave a tiny awkward wave, and then quickly looked down at her shoes. My younger cousins suddenly found the exposed brick wall entirely fascinating and actively avoided making any eye contact with me. I kept my face perfectly blank and walked slowly toward the long table. The place settings were immaculate. Thick gold-rimmed plates, heavy silver cutlery, and custom-printed name cards done in swirling metallic gold calligraphy. I started at the head of the table. Gregory, Brenda, Cassidy, Julian, Julian's father. I walked down the left side reading the beautiful cards. I walked up the right side. There was absolutely no card with my legal name on it. I stood completely still at the far end of the long room, right next to the swinging wooden doors that led directly into the bustling kitchen. For a brief, confusing second, I genuinely thought that maybe I had made a scheduling mistake. Maybe the rehearsal dinner was actually strictly limited to the bridal party. But then I remembered the $50,000 that had left my corporate account. I paid for this entire weekend to exist. My mother, Brenda, finally spotted me standing by the kitchen doors. She was wearing a deep green silk dress that definitely cost more than my entire car. She did not look even slightly surprised to see me. In fact, she looked deeply annoyed by my physical presence. "Nadia," she called out, her sharp voice carrying effortlessly over the background jazz music. "You made it. We are just about to sit down. You can just grab that extra wooden chair from the corner over there and pull it up to the very end of the table." She waved her hand dismissively in the air, exactly like she was giving directions to a lost delivery driver dropping off a package. I did not argue. I did not cause a scene or demand a proper place setting. I simply walked over to the dark corner, picked up a heavy, uncomfortable wooden chair, dragged it all the way to the very bottom edge of the table, and sat down. I was physically separated from the main conversations by a massive sprawling floral arrangement. I was a complete afterthought, a ghost they barely tolerated. I sat quietly in my uncomfortable corner as the overly long, highly pretentious toasts finally began. Julian's wealthy father stood up and talked for a solid 10 minutes about how beautiful and successful the young couple was. Then my father stood up, holding his wine glass high, and made a loud, booming joke about how much this extravagant wedding was costing him. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. He had no idea. And that brings us back to the moment the server walked past me, the empty space in front of my chair, and my mother's sneering declaration. "The help does not eat with us, Nadia. I only ordered for family." The silence was deafening. My sister and Julian exchanged a quick, triumphant glance. My parents looked smug. They thought they had won. They thought they had put me in my place. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. I calmly reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I didn't unlock it immediately. I just held it, letting the weight of it in my hand be a silent promise. My mother, still chewing her arugula, watched me with a condescending smirk. "What are you doing, Nadia? Calling a taxi?" Don't worry, we'll send you home with some leftovers. If there are any. I finally looked up directly into her eyes. My voice was calm, almost a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a razor. No, Mother, I'm not calling a taxi. I'm calling my lawyer. The smirk vanished from her face. A flicker of confusion, then alarm, crossed her features. Julian choked on his wine. Cassidy dropped her napkin. My father, who had been about to launch into another boisterous anecdote, suddenly looked very pale. My lawyer, I continued, my voice gaining strength, is going to inform the venue that the $50 Zeusen deposit for this entire weekend, which was paid by Apex Infrastructure, is being immediately withdrawn. Effective immediately. The contract is null and void. The color drained from my mother's face. What are you talking about, Nadia? She stammered. Her voice suddenly high-pitched and frantic. That's impossible. The deposit is non-refundable. Oh, it's very possible, I said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. Because the contract was signed by me, Nadia Petrova, CEO of Apex Infrastructure, with a clause stating that I, and only I, have the right to terminate the agreement under specific conditions. And public humiliation of the contracting party at a family event certainly qualifies. My father finally found his voice. Nadia, you can't be serious. This is Cassidy's wedding. You'll ruin everything. Ruin everything, I echoed. My voice now loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. You just told me I'm the help and don't belong at your table. Why would the help pay for your lavish wedding? Why would the help ensure your perfect day goes off without a hitch? I'm simply withdrawing my services. I stood up, pushing my uncomfortable wooden chair back with a loud scrape against the polished floor. The entire room was staring at me, their faces a mixture of shock, anger, and dawning horror. Julian's parents looked utterly bewildered. Enjoy your dinner, Mother, I said, my voice dripping with the same condescension she had used on me. I hope the food is worth the $50. Zeros you're about to lose. And with that, I turned and walked out of the private dining room, leaving behind a stunned silence and the escalating whispers of a family whose carefully constructed facade was crumbling around them. I didn't storm out. I didn't run. I walked at a perfectly measured pace, my cheap blazer feeling like a cloak of invincibility. As I reached the main dining room, I pulled out my phone again and dialed a number. My lawyer picked up on the second ring. It's Nadia, I said, my voice steady. Initiate the venue deposit withdrawal for the Petrov wedding, effective immediately. The next morning, I was in my office, preparing for a major investor meeting, when my phone rang. It was my father. His voice was strained, barely recognizable. Nadia, he began. What have you done? The venue just called. They said the deposit is gone. They're canceling the booking. Oh, really? I said, feigning surprise. That's a shame. Perhaps you should have invited the person who paid for it to eat at your table. But the wedding. Cassidy's dream wedding, he pleaded. You can't do this. We're family. Family? I scoffed. Is that what you call it when you treat your oldest daughter like a free utility, publicly humiliate her, and then expect her to foot the bill for your lavish lifestyle? No, Father. That's not family. That's exploitation. He was silent for a moment, the line the most beautiful music I have ever heard in my entire 32 years of life. It wasn't just quiet. It was a suffocating void. I could actually hear the faint, distant sound of the wedding DJ, playing a terrible pop song in the background on his end. I could hear my father draw in a sharp, ragged breath. He made a strange, wet, clicking sound in the back of his throat. He was literally choking on his own words. The math was rapidly doing itself in his head. The daughter he had called a burden, the daughter he had treated like a broke, miserable servant for over a decade, was actively being interviewed by Forbes magazine for being worth $50 million. And he had just permanently severed his ties to her for a $50 Zuzov wedding venue. Gregory, I finally said, my voice completely light and breezy. Did you need me to transfer a few dollars to your checking account so you can buy a drink? Click. The line went dead. He hung up. I smiled, picked up the phone, took it off speaker, and went back to giving my interview. The immediate aftermath was exactly as pathetic and predictable as I expected it to be. By Sunday morning, after the Forbes article officially went live on their digital platform, my phone practically melted down. The same family members who had watched me get publicly humiliated at the dinner table, without saying a single word, were suddenly flooding my inbox with paragraphs of apologies. Mother sent a massive wall of text detailing how she had always known I was destined for absolute greatness, blaming the dinner plate incident entirely on the catering staff. Julian sent a disgustingly familiar message calling me a visionary boss and asking if I had any open executive positions at Apex Infrastructure. My father didn't text, but he left a rambling, pathetic voicemail, trying to explain that he was just highly stressed about the wedding finances when he called me a burden 5 years ago. I didn't reply to a single one of them. I didn't get angry. I didn't blow up and send them nasty paragraphs back. I simply blocked every single one of their phone numbers, routed all of their email addresses directly to my spam folder, and went completely about my day. Cassidy did text me a few days later from an unknown number. She sent one sentence: "I am so scared that you won't be in my life anymore." I typed back, "You are entirely welcome in my life, Cassidy. But only on the day you can figure out how to be kind to me without borrowing my money." I blocked that number too. It has been exactly 9 weeks since the wedding. I heard through the grapevine, mostly from Aunt Martha, whom I occasionally still get coffee with, that Cassidy and Julian's wedding ended up being a deeply stressful, watered-down event because they couldn't afford any of the extravagant extras they wanted. Julian is currently trying to launch a new, terrible internet marketing scheme to pay off his father's credit cards. The professional wedding album went up online. I saw a few pictures, people standing in soft light, hands touching, the highly expensive photographer catching the exact moment of fake laughs that look like genuine grace. My face isn't in a single photograph. And for the first time in my life, I realize that is perfectly fine. Most of my actual successful life doesn't photograph well anyway. I still live in my modest apartment, though I am casually looking at buying a house with cash next year. I still occasionally fix broken laptops for my close friends, but now I do it strictly for fun, not survival. People always want a massive dramatic twist ending to these kinds of stories. They want the movie ending where I storm back into the reception in a designer dress, flip a table, and scream at them while they cry and beg for my forgiveness. But what actually happened is so much smaller and infinitely more useful. I paid exactly what I chose to pay. I strictly refused what I didn't want to fund. I wrote my absolute boundaries down in permanent ink. And I calmly walked away from the table, like you walk out of a store when they put a sign in the window that says, "Members only." If you absolutely need a moral to this story, here is the dull, highly effective one that actually works in the real world. Do not ever sponsor the room that bars your chair. Do not let toxic family members treat you like a permanent coupon code for your legal name and your hard-earned credit score. Love loudly if you can afford the emotional cost, but learn to say no quietly and firmly when you can't. I am no longer an unpaid guarantor, and I am certainly no longer a ghost at their table. I am a woman who simply chooses exactly what she funds.